Unlike the wise men who visited Jesus in Bethlehem, today we seem to expect God to come to us, to bear us gifts, to pay homage to us. Whether we admit it or not, we're too busy or we're too entrenched in everyday life to spend time seeking a relationship with our Maker. This week we celebrate Epiphany Sunday. Epiphany Sunday is a time to recognize the Gentile foreigners who sought out Jesus, the newborn King. Little is known about these visitors from the East. They were outsiders. They had come from afar. They were students of astrology and of ancient Hebrew scripture. They brought expensive gifts with them that suggested that they understood much about the role that Jesus would fulfill for the waiting world. Take a look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Based on Herod's edict to kill the infants under the age of 2, Jesus was probably a toddler when the wise men found him, still located in Bethlehem. See Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. Recently I heard a preacher joke that if the wise men had instead been wise women who were seeking the Christ child, they probably would have stopped earlier to ask for directions and therefore would have arrived in time for the birth of Jesus. When we read the story of the wise men's visit, we're apt to think of the ruthless King Herod with disdain. He was arrogant, proudly claiming that title that had been given to him by the Roman Senate as King of the Jews. He was a killer. He had arranged the death of family members whom he thought might be seeking to displace him from his throne. And he was untrustworthy and conniving, as evidenced by his request to the wise men that they come back and let Herod know where the newborn king was so that Herod too might go to worship him. That's Matthew chapter 2, verse 8. But have you noticed that Herod was not alone in being disturbed about the arrival of Jesus? Scripture says that when King Herod heard the news from the wise men, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. That's Matthew 2, verse 3. Wait a minute, the Jewish nation had long sought the presence of the Messiah. Their prophets had foretold in great detail the arrival of their king. Why then would they have been disturbed by the news that the Messiah had been born? Scripture does not directly answer that question. We do know, however, that the Roman government repressed the Jewish people of that day. We know that the Jews wanted a king, someone to rise up and free them from the tyranny of the Roman rule. The people of Jerusalem had their own notion about what they needed from God, and an infant born into poverty did not fit their idea of a Messiah. The people of that day no doubt busied themselves with the tasks of everyday life, eking out a living, tending flocks, working the fields, buying or selling in the marketplace. They had neither the time nor the patience to wait for a baby to mature into a Messiah. We're not so different today. We're often too busy. We're too busy to commit to serious time and effort to build a relationship with Jesus. We have specific needs. We expect God to respond to our model for blessings or what we think we need. But the wise men from an unknown and distant land were willing to forego the business of the day and commit themselves fully to following God's direction. Epiphany for me brings back memories of a friend who called me many years ago on the Monday morning immediately following Epiphany Sunday. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my friend was then struggling in his new profession as a stockbroker. He was financially drained and had been crying out to God for blessings and direction. On that Epiphany Monday, my friend set aside his plans and instead followed instructions from God. He called me, and after an awkward moment on the telephone, blurted out that God had directed him to call because God was suggesting that I had work for my friend. I immediately resisted. I told my friend that he must have misunderstood God because I had no work for him. And to underscore that point, I shared with him that I was busy at the time. I was looking for someone with Canadian connections and expertise in investment banking. It was then that my friend pointed out to me that he had previously worked in Canada as a senior vice president of one of the largest investment banking firms in all of Canada. He was the person I was looking for, and his call resulted in work that reversed his financial distress. The people of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus' birth had their own ideas about what God needed to do for them, and therefore they rejected God's plan that was in their midst but was beyond their expertise or their experience and understanding. My friend, who called on Epiphany Monday, sought out God. He listened for God's direction, and like the wise men in the Epiphany story, my friend set aside his plans and instead listened for God's, and that made all the difference. Wise men still seek him. That statement was true in Jesus' time, and it certainly is true today. Consider, if you will, these questions for introspection as we focus on the wise men of Epiphany. Question number 1. What is currently interfering with your development of a closer relationship with Jesus? Question number 2. The insight of the wise men grew as they studied ancient scripture. How can you grow in your study of scripture during this new year? And question number 3, the wise men honored Jesus with gifts. What gifts, what time, talent, and resources can you offer to honor Jesus? The gifts carried by the Magi demonstrated that they had a deep understanding about the significance of Jesus' birth. Gold, a gift for royalty, frankincense and incense to carry prayers upward to heaven, and myrrh, an embalming spice used to preserve the dead. These were strange gifts for a toddler, but insightful presents for a king, a person of divine origin who would die for his people. Wise men and women still seek him.